If we think about the patterns in our life that keep repeating, right? And the issues that keep coming up for us that make us feel stuck and not good enough and hopeless. If we learn coping skills, it helps us deal with it better. If you think of your brain like a garden, the coping skills is like trimming the weeds, right? But EMDR is like ripping them out from the root. It's getting to the bottom of that problem so that, let's say, you have anxiety about driving, right? Because you got into a bad car accident. We can do EMDR on that. And the next time you get in that car, your body shouldn't be tight because that's the thing that people ignore. It's like trauma is stored in our bodies.
What if the truth came in a gel cap and we could just pop it in our mouths and forget about it? Well, it doesn't, and we can't. But we can laugh in the face of reality while plotting our survival. Welcome to the Truth Tastes Funny podcast. I am your host, Hirsch Redpun, and if my guests can handle the truth, so can you. Open wide, folks. Here it comes. My guest today on Truth Tastes Funny is Jamie Vollmoeller, and we're going to really dive into accountability and talking about shit that we don't like to talk about, because that was one of the reasons I started Truth Tastes Funny. And Jamie's a clinical therapist. She's a radio show host and a mom with ADHD. Jamie, welcome to Truth Tastes Funny.
Hi, Hirsch. I'm so excited to be here.
It's good to see you, and it's great to have you. We were talking a little bit before we started recording about how people just, it's easier just to not, right?
Yeah.
Let's start there.
So yeah, I was saying to Hirsch that one of the the reason I was so excited to be on here, because it's my job is basically talking about things that people don't want to talk to. Like they come in my
Right.
office, they talk about all the hard shit that they don't want to talk about. And I'm really passionate about people taking accountability for their role in their situations. And I'm a trauma therapist, right? So that doesn't mean that what happened to you is your fault or that you're in this situation because of you. When I say take accountability, I mean, let's look at what are the patterns that maybe we learned in childhood. And that's not your fault if you learned how to cope by yelling at people or avoiding conflict in childhood and you're continuing that. But as an adult, if we continue this and it still is affecting our relationships, our jobs, our fulfillment in life, we do need to learn to look at that, take accountability and switch it. And there's so many people that I've seen throughout my years. There's the people that feel like it's all my parents, and if I didn't have this childhood, I wouldn't be messed up. And then there's people that feel like my parents were absolutely perfect, and I'm not going to touch that with a 10-foot pole because it's too painful. But it still comes up, right? So we have to address it.
Well, there's also in some cases, the idealization of our parents.
Yeah.
We want to honor, if they're gone, then we want to honor their memory. We don't want to remember or confront things, and they don't have to be like horrible things. It's
No.
almost like we idealize them because there's a standard. We want to have a standard, and you can't have in our mind, in a lot of ways, maybe you can speak to this, a flawed standard. Does it
Yeah.
does it break everything for us to confront the things that aren't perfect?
So I think part of the reason that so many people idealize, especially after death. So if there's a traumatic death, like my two best friends lost their dad at a DWI, and he was an alcoholic after 9/11. He was at 9/11. And so I'm a New Yorker. We're Long
Oh,
Islanders over here. So he was a police officer in the building, saw everyone, and he had issues from that. And when they talk about their dad, they don't talk about any of the bad shit from their childhood. And I was there, bro. It was rough. But they idealize the heck out of him because it's so painful to look at him in that way. And they don't want to go back there because they feel like they're dishonoring his memory. And they feel like he did his best and he tried to be a good dad. Like they don't believe
yeah.
him for what they went through because they know he experienced something really traumatic. It was really hard for him to cope. He had a really hard life. And it just feels painful to look at him in that light, especially when he's not here and you can't have that conversation.
Yeah.
Right.
And in a
So,
way, you can I've worked in public relations and in messaging my whole career, advertising and messaging and all that stuff. And so it's always about being diplomatic, I feel.
Yeah.
And I don't feel that that's a bad thing. I don't think
No.
diplomacy is a problem. I think sensitivity and empathy are hand in hand with putting out a good message. But you have to kind of embrace the imperfections
Yeah.
because that is also what makes us unique. I tell my clients and my listeners, I tell everybody that there is nobody like you.
Yeah.
And there's going to be things that are great and things that are challenging and things that let's sell the truth. Let's take it all on. But why do you think that we struggle so much with reality?
So when we go back to that idealizing parent, because I missed this point, right? When we are children, if you are 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds, 8-year-olds, you are entirely reliant on your parents, right? And our brains are wired to keep us safe. And as a child, the person who's supposed to keep us safe that we know, like innately, is our parents. So even if you have parents that are acting unsafe, right? And especially if you have parents that are acting unsafe, most children will blame themselves because that is a safer psychological state than my parents can't take care of me, right? So to have that thought of like they're abusive, I'm not safe here 24/7 would be horribly distressing to a child. So we tend to excuse a lot of our parents' behavior and blame ourselves. Like my dad screamed at me because I'm a bad kid, or my mom's not present because she doesn't care enough. I'm not important enough. I don't have enough value. And we blame ourselves, and then we idolize them. We say, oh, well, they must be right because they're the parent. And we're wired to do this, right? And it sucks because I mean, and I can say like I'm very open about my childhood. I'm very open about my own mental health struggles. I feel like it's really important for people to talk about the fact that like it's normal. Most of us therapists are crazy people that are like, how do we fix our own crazy? And we went to school for it, like everyone struggles. And it's just learning how to cope better, right? It's also this thing where I think our society wants this quick fix, right? And if you think about like trauma and the way that we talk to ourselves, especially which starts in childhood, that inner critic starts when your parents start criticizing you and you're like, oh, you're bad, you're this. All of those voices start at a very early age and they continue, and learning how to reparent ourselves and talk to ourselves kindly and take accountability for what we have control in now, and learning to regulate and be aware and be mindful. So many of us are just not mindful. We're moving through life and they're like, I just want this to stop, right? I
Yeah.
just want it to stop right now. And then they get hopeless because they try certain things and there's not immediate relief. And I think we're just so accustomed to immediate like answers, relief in our society. But if you're a 30-year-old or woman and you've experienced, a very traumatic childhood, multiple like abusive relationships, have had negative self-esteem your whole life, you're not fixing that in 3 months of therapy, girl. Like you got a lot
Yeah.
of stuff to work through. It's gonna take
Yeah.
a while. Progress takes time,
Yeah.
and
Now,
that's okay.
speaking of progress, you have some proven modalities for dealing with fear, dealing with easing sadness. Can you talk about some of those?
Yeah, so my practice here in New York, I have two. I have one in New York and one in Missouri. It's an interesting backstory that we
As
won't
most
get
people do.
into, right?
Just as
Uh,
yeah.
we we
Who doesn't
specialize
have a
in
practice in Missouri?
it's just a
From New
weird place
York.
to
Well, I live
it's
in Iowa. I live in
oh
Iowa. Well, my wife's from Iowa, but I live in Iowa, and it's like I grew up in Miami. I went to school in New York, and I started my business in Los Angeles. And then, of course, I live in Iowa City because who doesn't? Who wouldn't after that trajectory? But anyway, we digress.
so I do in my New York location, we all are trained in eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. So that is a highly specialized form of therapy I'm going to say to the listeners, if you are seeing someone who says they're EMDR certified, please ask who they were certified by. Because there are so many, I don't want to say the word fraud, but it's really like fraudulent companies. They're saying that they're
Right.
training these people in EMDR in a 1 week course with like very little follow-up, very little training. And they're like, yeah, you're a level 2 clinician now. And the actual training for EMDR through EMDRIA, which is the EMDR International Association, is much longer. It's your basic course. And then to get to level 1, you have to do, your 10 hours in your basic course, another 20 hours of training, and it's a
So,
lot of continuing.
so Jamie, is there an EMDRIA certified,
Yes.
like, kind of thing that people should look for?
Yeah. So if you go to EMDRIA, emdria.org, you can look up a list of EMDRIA certified professionals. I will say not everyone is on there. You have to pay for a membership. So just because they're not on there doesn't mean they didn't get trained through EMDRIA. But it's important to ask because there are people that do this 1 week training through like PESI, for example, and say they're EMDR certified. That personally bothers the heck out of me because it is a modality that is extremely powerful and will bring you, like, when you go through EMDR, the process is basically this bilateral stimulation. So it could be tapping, it could be eye movements, following a finger back and forth. In my office, we have a light bar to follow, we have buzzies, we have headphones for those who, might have seizures and can't do the light bar or
Wow,
have
yeah.
like medical issues. But bilateral stimulation helps to make new connections in the brain. And it brings us back. When you're in an actual processing session, a lot of people will have vivid memory of what happened, even when they dissociated it from the past. So if you're not going to a clinician who is skilled in wrapping you back up and sending you back
Yeah,
out to the world neatly, that can do a lot of damage, right? And
right.
you need to be seeing someone who's assessing whether or not you're ready to go through that, because there have been people who have done this modality and it's very common for people in that stage. I've done EMDR with people who have been sexually abused by their family members, and we've gone through it in like a 3-month period. It is quick treatment because it is brain based, so it's a more rapid form of healing. But during those 3 months, her symptoms did spike sometimes because it was really traumatic stuff that she was working through. And it brought it all back up for her, which, causes a lot of body discomfort. So you need to make sure you're going to someone who knows what the heck they're doing. So that's where I'm going to start with that.
Yeah.
But EMDR is a brain-based modality. So in the therapy world, there's what I think the public is used to is talk therapy, right? You come in, you go, oh, my week was this, my week was that. You do some problem solving, you learn some coping skills, you go home, you feel better. A lot of people just feel like therapy is a vent session. So our sessions here are very different. They are very structured. Sometimes we have a vent session if someone has like they need to. Sometimes you need to vent. But
Yeah.
what we're really trying to do is pull the problem, like pull the weeds out. If we think about the patterns in our life that keep repeating, right? And the issues that keep coming up for us that make us feel stuck and not good enough and hopeless. If we learn coping skills, it helps us deal with it better. If you think of your brain like a garden, the coping skills is like trimming the weeds, right? But EMDR is like ripping them out from the root. It's getting to the bottom of that problem so that, let's say you have anxiety about driving, right? Because you got into a
Hmm.
bad car accident. We can do EMDR on that. And the next time you get in that car, your body shouldn't be tight, because that's the thing that people ignore. It's like trauma is stored in our bodies. So the
Yeah.
reason our anxiety skyrockets is because our brain is on high alert. So our chest gets tight, our muscles get tight, and it's hard to calm down when you're in that state. It's
I
hard to access your rational brain. What EMDR does is help to move that traumatic memory to long-term memory so that it is not as hangable. I don't know how to describe that, but it's not as like in the forefront of your mind. It's not stored in that fight or flight area where it's going to get pinged all the time and your body's going to release cortisol and adrenaline and put you in this physical state that's really uncomfortable. And it just makes it easier to move through. It doesn't mean that you're not sad, or anxious or upset, but you're not at a 10. You can function, you can use your brain, like,
Yeah.
get really worked up, Hirsch, and it's fun.
Yeah.
Like, that you're like super angry and you're not making sense, but you're just in that state. Like it helps to make it so that you're in a more calm, regulated body more often, and that these major triggers that were coming up for you aren't as triggering. So if they were an 8, maybe now they're a 2. But my anxiety
Wow.
at an 8 and a 2 is very different, right? At a 2, I could be like, all right, take a deep breath and have this conversation. It might still be uncomfortable, but it's going to go a lot better than if my anxiety is at an 8. Does that make
Well,
sense?
yeah, it does. I mean, I resonate very strongly with the driving thing because about 10 years ago, I had a car accident. And after that, the idea of driving for, it was on a long drive. And it's like if the idea of being in another long drive and then just being scared
Yeah.
lasted for a couple of years, a good couple of years, where I had to pick someone up at an airport that was like 2.5 hours away. And I was like, okay, I need to stop in between because this is just a very visceral kind of experience. And I don't want the fear to cause, there was no rational reason I would be
Yeah.
afraid, but it was like the fear of being, it's anxiety, the fear of being afraid was debilitating at a
Yeah,
certain
it's that
point.
physical. I know what you're talking
Yeah.
about. And I use the car accident because I feel like that's a universal, like a lot of people have experienced that. I mean, for me, I crashed into a median in grad school, and there was a good 2 years that every time I had to drive next to one of those big medians
Yeah.
like my chest would just be so tight and I just avoided it. I was like, but driving, like I can avoid a median, you can avoid long trips, right? But when your anxiety is about like, it's snowing outside. And there are people that
Right.
you have PTSD, like, or someone said something negative about you, like that is chronic. And
Yeah.
chronic anxiety and chronic stress affect our brain development. It affects our brain functioning. It makes us more likely to have a host of medical issues, including high blood pressure, heart problems, diabetes. Mental health is so crucial to our overall well-being. And it's just really sad to me that our society like doesn't see it that way, because it's so true. If you're in a chronically tight body, what effect does that have on your, overall health, on your
Well,
overall
there's
like functioning?
there's 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 two big points in there. One is like we talked about in the beginning, acknowledging being not just acknowledge. We started out on kind of a light note, acknowledging, like accountability because it's easier not to go there. Some of these
Yeah.
things come with baggage and other things, but I like that we're getting into the debilitating part of it because another one of the things you talk about is getting your life back.
Yeah.
Because in some ways, you know, the stuff that we're touching on now, look, driving was something I had to do all the time. It wasn't like I could, when I got out of the accident and I had been on a long cross country trip, I was alone and I was not supposed to be alone. And I ended up driving alone and I fell asleep for like a split second and I flipped my car. I flipped like 3 times. I was really lucky. I was very, very lucky. But
Yeah.
still, the coming out of it, you're like, okay, well, I don't want to drive for a while. And some people have the luxury of not driving for a while, and other people have to just get their shit together and start driving again. And in
Yeah.
this case, it was maybe 2 months later, and I had to do that long drive. And it wasn't a long drive. Like 2 hours, 2.5 hours isn't really a long drive, but that concept, that feeling that we get, that body, that tight body, that's very, very accurate. Locking is,
Yeah.
is something. So talk about getting your life back.
So for me, the reason I'm passionate about this modality, right? I have been in therapy since I am 8 years old. So I have been to all different types of therapists. I have tried all different types of therapy. And it felt like cutting the grass. Like I'd come in, I'd get my hair cut, I'd feel a little better. And then it would bubble up again and bubble up again. And what I used to say is, I just want to stop playing whack-a-mole. Because when your body is chronically tight and you have chronic anxiety, all your thoughts are irrational. It's not like I didn't know my thoughts were irrational. I was sitting there arguing with myself all day long, which is so exhausting. It's mentally exhausting, it's physically exhausting. And when I did EMDR, the topic that I did it on, those thoughts no longer came up for me. And I was like, holy shit. Like, what is this fucking trickery that we're doing here?
Right, right. What
It just got
you're a
rid of that
witch.
body stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was like it removes it from the body. So there's a lot of research that shows that our body stores trauma. So whatever happened in that incident, like that car accident for you, right? And you had that chest tightness and you were very on edge. Now, when you're put back in a situation where your brain feels like this may be a threat. So for you, that was being in a car, your whole body's tight again.
Right.
Right. So what EMDR does is it, like I said before, it moves where it is in the brain. And what it also does, and it's harder to give an example about a car accident, but for me, I'll say the first time I did it, I was pregnant with my second son. I had to do IVF for my first child and my second child. And I had a lot of shame and negativity and fear around not being able to carry my child. And I was like very newly pregnant. So that's what I
Oh.
did it on. The difference in my two sons, by the way, is remarkable. And I think it's because Danny's pregnancy, my youngest, I wasn't an anxious mess the whole time. I wasn't ruminating about, oh, I can't eat this and I can't do this and something's gonna go wrong and let me check his heartbeat every 2 friggin' seconds. Like I was so
Mm-hmm.
chronic with my first, and the second, it was just like, no, it's gonna be okay. And the reason that happened for me is all the logical arguments that we have, right? What EMDR does is it reinforces those. So it strengthens those neural connections. So after we got through the bad part of all of my fears of what could happen in this pregnancy, what happened was my brain reminded me, you've done this before. You gave birth and your baby's fine. You have a wonderful attachment. You breastfed him for how many months? Like you got this in the bag. You're going to be good. There's no logical reason for you to feel this way.
Right.
Just felt in my body more true. So then I didn't have that physical response that keeps you stuck in that loop. Does
Yeah.
that make sense?
It makes total sense because a lot of what I've worked on personally the last few years is mindset.
Mhm.
And that's one of those things where, we keep telling ourselves, oh, I need to, in my case, it was mostly around business, around my relationship with my kind of relationship with money and things like that, like not wanting to. It's not a good thing for business to not want to charge people money for something because that
No,
just isn't
as a therapist,
practical.
I totally relate though, because it's like, oh, I want to help people, but they can't afford my service. And I want to
Right.
like, you want to make it better. But then that you're talking about money mindset issues, that
Yeah.
fear about what are other people going to think of me? Are they going to think I'm greedy? Like, and especially as a therapist, it's like, oh, you're just doing this for the money. And I'm like, when I was taking all insurance, I was like, bro, some of these I lose money
Right.
on.
Right.
Like, but that money mindset comes from our childhood and what we're taught about money and what it means, especially if you didn't grow up with money, for people who have money. What did your family think about people who had money? And
Right.
that's
Right.
going
Right.
to influence the way that you see what you do with money. And then you have this shame about having money that you worked
But
hard for.
but beyond all of that, Jamie, is the idea that it's not an intellectual fix.
Yeah.
So in other words, I mean, I was aware of certain things, but I also was had opinions that were it wasn't like I was someone who needed to be convinced
Yeah.
of, or why do you hate money or why do you, I had a friend tell me that years ago, oh, you don't respect money. That's why you'll have it and then you'll throw it away. It's like you don't respect it. You don't treat it kindly. And I didn't know what the hell he was talking about. I'm like, what do you think? It's like it has feelings, like I'm a, but as I got more mature and as I got older, I started to work on it and meditate and do just all kinds of other things. I was realizing, this is about some kind of there's a physiological element to my psychological makeup. And that was something that I think was very eye-opening for me.
Yeah. Because we're not really taught that, right? And
Yeah.
the physical for me is what makes the difference in the therapy I do. And EMDR isn't the only modality you could do that with. There are plenty of other somatic-based therapies that really bring you back to your body and that body awareness. And especially for people who've undergone trauma, our brain, again, as a survival mechanism, tends to dissociate. So we become less aware of the fact that we're daydreaming and we're operating on it's like almost like autopilot, where you're just going through the motions, but you're not really mentally present for
Yeah.
anything that happened. It's like you do all the tasks on your list, but it's more like you're a robot moving through the day or an anxious zombie sometimes is what I say. Like I'm
Yeah.
vibrating, but I'm just like slowly moving through the day and doing the best I can.
Yeah.
And doing that body work really helps us learn how to be in our bodies. Because if you grew up in a stressful household or were under chronic stress or grew up very poor and didn't have your basic needs met, your body was probably constantly on high alert. And what happens is we learn to just ignore that because when your body is tense all the time, that's overwhelming. So we dissociate from our bodies. And I see so
Yeah.
many people who've experienced trauma and the way that they've always coped is to intellectualize, which is how I coped for many, many years. And that's great, but it didn't make me feel any better. Like I could get through,
Yeah.
I could cope better, but I don't want to feel this way all the time.
Yeah, it's called suppression. When you're just suppressing stuff,
Yeah,
and I think in my case, I think it a lot of it was, like epigenetic imprinting, inherited trauma, things like that. That
yeah,
I wouldn't even think of, that I
yeah,
wouldn't have necessarily even explored. But the other thing is, while you're busy intellectualizing all this stuff, nothing's getting processed and you're not getting rid of anything, and nor are you bringing in any good stuff,
yeah.
really, because you're not really happy. One of the things I would like to talk about, and I'm respectful of your time. I don't want to, we could
We
talk
got
about,
time, Mom.
we could actually talk for a long time about all this stuff, but I would like to just get your take on happiness, on what happiness, how does the word happiness, what does it mean to you, and how does it factor into the work that you do?
So for me and most of my clients, finding happiness comes down to accepting themselves and learning to love themselves. I think for a lot of my life, I'm an avid people pleaser. I say now that I'm a people pleaser in recovery.
Yeah.
I chased happiness by trying to find validation from others for my worth. And I never truly felt happy. I never truly felt appreciated. It was just this never ending cycle of like chasing something that eventually I'll feel like I'm deserving to be happy or I am finally good enough. And what's interesting about that, and I know you definitely know this as an entrepreneur, it's like when you set that bar, then it's not even like you celebrate. It's like, oh, okay, well, that's great, but I'm still not good enough until I do this. And then you just move
Right.
to the next thing.
Right.
So being happy is like learning to be present for me. What's been helpful. And I'm currently pregnant her, so I have my
Oh,
third child on the way.
congratulations.
She was not planned. So she
Yeah.
was a big oops that we were not expecting because I've been with my husband since I'm 18 and we had
Yeah.
to pay tens of thousands of dollars to have children. And this comes at a time where I am separating from my business partner in Missouri, opening up a whole new business there. We have a lot of transitions going on. I have a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old. I watch my nephews who are 4 and 2,
Oh,
40s.
wow. Yeah.
So we got a lot going on. But what's been helpful to me and what's keeping me happy and the therapy that I've undergone has helped me to stay present, to not
Mm-hmm.
focus on what needs to be done tomorrow, what's going to happen because I think that's a lot. That's what anxiety is. It's constantly like either looking back at the past and being ruminating on what happened to us or looking into the future and worrying about all the things that could happen. And
Yeah.
being happy for me is like learning to be in that present moment, putting it aside and sitting with my kids and just enjoying reading the book with them and putting them to sleep and learning
Yeah.
to be present and okay with myself and less worried about what other people are going to say about me setting that boundary of, on the weekends I'm home with my kids, and unless the house is burning, the building's burning down, so freaking call me.
That's
Figure
that's
it out.
the best thing in a way is like some people, are naturally present and
Yeah.
they're naturally not concerned about, some people like we get frustrated with people sometimes who are unaware of time.
My sister's like that.
A
She's
bit,
just
one
like
of my
whenever
best
she
friends.
shows up, she shows
Yeah.
up. She has no anxiety about being late. I'm like, that is the worst thing in the world for me. Yeah.
One of my best friends said, and he's a business I'm partner with him in a business. And it's like, but still he got better and better as we knew each other about turning up and stuff. But he had said at one point, I don't believe in it. Like, I don't believe in the physics of time. I don't think it actually is what we think it is. And again, that was one of those things that you could easily blow off, but it's very true. And I
Yeah.
think that again, his makeup is such that he is in the moment, he is in the present. And I think being around people like that, and for whatever reason that I've attracted them, my wife's like that too, that pulled them into my life, is that they're they're by osmosis kind of giving me one of those things that I was trying to get, which was instead of trying to get to the next thing, just try to get to the next thing, get to the next thing is to like live in the thing that
Enjoy
you're
now.
doing. Enjoy
Enjoy now.
it. This is
Yeah.
it.
Be happy with your life right now. Like
This is
even
the
if that was
show,
perfect. But
right?
it's okay.
This is the big show. There is no other thing there is no completely other iteration. There is evolution of yourself. There's becoming better. There's all kinds of great stuff and great milestones. But this is it. It's all one thing. It's a continuum. It's not a
Life
maze to
is
get
never going to
through.
stop being stressful. And I work with so many people who say, I'll be happy when.
Oh yeah.
You
Yeah.
won't. You need to learn to be happy right now with what you got right now and find a way to be grateful for what you have and enjoy it. Like, and even if you have nothing, like I was sitting outside the other day, which my life is so chaotic that that rarely happens. And my house is full of four boys that run around all the time. So it's never quiet. And I was just listening to the birds chirp. And my husband's like, "Oh, you want to come inside?" I was like, "No, I'm gonna stay here and drink my coffee and like just watch the birds and listen to them chirp." Like just because I was just so
Yeah.
nice to be in that moment and have that peace and quiet for once. But when you're not truly present, it's just one thing after the other, after the other, after the other. And it's like you're not living. You're not
Yeah.
truly living. You're surviving. And
Right.
there's so many people out there that are just surviving. And I get it. I 110% get it. I have so been there in my life. And there are days now that I feel like, oh my God, how am I going to survive this day? Like I must, and I still have those thoughts. Like they'll come up and I'll be like, oh my God, this is so overwhelming. How am I doing all the things that I'm doing?
Yeah.
And then I remind myself, like, okay, but you have a team. You can delegate. You're going to get through it. You always get through it. Take a breath. What can we do right now to regulate our bodies? And that helps me a lot too when I start to feel myself spiraling, worrying about things, is to just pause, take a
Yeah.
few deep breaths, like sit in my body, regulate my breathing so that my body is calm. And that is so crucial because when we are in that fight or flight response, when our body's all tense, you don't have as much access to your prefrontal cortex, which is where all the logical information you have about life,
Yeah.
factual, is stored. So you're making your decisions based on fear versus logic, and it's like you gotta, if you take that breath, then you can look at all the different, you said something before about, I think you said discernment, like looking at being able to see all the perspectives, right?
Yeah.
And when you take that breath and you get out of that tense body, you might be like, oh, there's no reason for me to be so anxious right now. My husband might have just made dinner and was like, did you take the garbage out? And maybe I got offended because I was like, you know what I mean? But it's like, if I take that breath and I look at the situation, it's like, well, did he mean to upset me? Is he overwhelmed? and it helps
Yeah.
us to not internalize, it helps us to not spiral. So much of what we do is trying to predict what other people are thinking, why they're doing what they're doing. And one of the things I really work on with my clients, besides that regulated body and learning to just love themselves, is learning to just ask the question and stop making assumptions. Like I'll literally say to my husband, because I am a very anxious person just by nature, I will say to him, like, are you upset with me or is my own anxiety? Like, just let me know. Because
Yeah.
sometimes I'm just in a tight body, but I'm like, is that because he's anxious or is it because I'm anxious? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
just discern what's going on here. But asking people questions about like, is that what you meant can
Yeah.
also help us to just not blame ourselves constantly and be present and not spiral into thinking about, well, they said this, so this means that, and go on and on and
Yeah,
on.
because once we go down that road, now we're writing the story ourselves. At
Yeah,
that point, we're making it happen, which I have done. I mean, there's
well
plenty
done
of
it.
stuff to work on,
Yeah,
and there's no end to that. Like it's
no,
not there's also stuff that happens that are just literally impulses that aren't even, we're not even thinking at that moment. I was thinking that now that what I have overcome is some of that fear of success, some of that stuff that I used to
imposter
be,
syndrome.
yeah, imposter syndrome. So now that I'm over that, now I'm like, oh, well, now things are gonna open up a little more. I'm getting a little busier in my life, and I'm not trying to avoid anything. So now that means I'm gonna get increasingly busy. And then I was thinking today, yeah, so now I'm going to probably need to start with cannabis because I'm going to need something that's going to just kind of take it down a little bit so that I'm not in hyperdrive all the time, and maybe I won't work, but I can look for some other, holistic
I'm not against weed at
approaches.
all. I
Yeah.
think it's a natural substance. I mean, I'd rather a client, smoke a joint than take a benzo if that's gonna,
Yeah.
that's addictive, but do speak to your doctor because I'm not a prescriber.
Right. Oh, I
But
always do.
you
I
know,
always I always speak to my doctors, and I always tell them the same thing. Look, the more natural remedies, the better. That's
yeah.
the idea.
But what I'd say to you, Hirsch, is so you're saying you went from this like crippling imposter syndrome, right? Where you felt like stuck and you couldn't move. And then you went from that to saying yes to everything, right?
Well, yeah, I went through a period where I said yes to everything.
Oh, okay.
I'm not in a say yes to everything mode now. It's
Okay, good.
just I'm saying yes to the things that I really want. But I think, and this is maybe we'll do a part two. We'll do another. We can talk about like abundance and and welcoming things and allowing things, good
Yeah.
things to happen. But I think as that happens, there's less resistance, let's put it that way. There's less resistance from the unconscious, or let's say, and then at that point you have to deal with a flow of just people coming to you
Well,
and
it's
like,
it's still a change, right? So your
yeah,
body and your nervous system is now adjusting to this new change in life,
right,
right? Where
yeah,
you're doing more, even if it's things that you enjoy.
yeah.
But I will say, don't become a workaholic, love, and make sure that you
Thank-
also schedule in something to do for you, right? Because most of us who are entrepreneurs who struggle with imposter syndrome have that core belief of I'm not good enough and we need to prove our worth to everyone else. And one of the biggest like things that you can do to just feel less like that is just learn to take care of yourself, right? Like do
oh yeah.
plan one thing every 2 weeks that you do for you. Maybe you and your wife go on a date, but make sure you factor in some you time there
That's
too.
like, see, that's a whole other can of worms, because then you're saying, oh, well, once you bring another person into it, now you have to pick something that is, you can do. Now, it would be great if couples could do one date night is for one person and another date night is for the other person. I don't know that we've ever thought of it that way. That's an interesting thing that maybe it can also be addressed is, that thing for you that you are doing for you, but that you're doing as a couple, then you're doing it for the other person,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. I mean, me and my husband have a lot of the same hobbies. we're both terrible at self-care. So self-care is something I preach, but I'm also honest with my clients that I fall off that bandwagon and need to get back on frequently because my life
Yeah.
is very stressful and we all fall off. And I think it's important to be honest about our shortcomings just so people don't feel like progress is this straight line. Progress is this dips and valleys and peaks and valleys. That's what I meant.
Right.
But like we will encourage each other because we know that both of us struggle with self-care and we know that both of us do better when we go to the gym. So my husband will say to me like, I'm really struggling to get the motivation to go to the gym. Can you kick me in the ass tomorrow and make sure I get my butt there? And
Yeah.
we talk about things like that and try to support one another because it is really hard when you've become so accustomed to being in that chronic stress state and busy, 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 busy. It almost feels uncomfortable to be in calm and do something
Yes.
that makes sense, right?
Yes.
It's like life feels more comfortable when everything is chaos than when it's
Right.
calm because we can function in the chaos.
Well, it's not even like I used to work for somebody who, when I was much, much younger, who was a chaos magnet by design. Like they just love to live in chaos and they want to, you know, but I think sometimes it's just that the when I'll be happy when thing is also, well, I'm more relaxed when I'm working. And I hear that a lot and I often feel that. I'm more relaxed when I'm getting stuff done. And it's like, I don't know I don't know how to address that, but that
Oh, so
happens.
I did actually a whole podcast episode on my podcast first about that and that need to be productive because we feel in control at work. We feel valued at
Right.
work. We
Right.
feel appreciated at work and we know we're good. And then we get home to our interpersonal relationships. And even though we have the communication skills because we're good at our jobs, even though we know we're likable or we wouldn't be good at our jobs, right? We lose all that when we get home and we kind of revert back to whatever issues we have if you haven't worked on them. And that was me too. I've always been an overachiever. I was good at school and then I had a good career. And it took a long time for me to work more on the relational issues I had from like attachment issues I had growing up that made me like not trust people or not ask for help or feel the need to do everything myself, right? Like that was a
Right.
big thing for me because I can't rely on anyone else. I need to do it or it's not going to get done. And working through all that made it more comfortable for me to be home because I learned how to take the skills that I already had at work and they're transferable skills and use them at home so that I'm not feeling like I'm lost, I'm not in control and I can function better. And communicating with the people in your family about what you need to feel valued. Because for so many of my clients that are workaholics, it's truly because at work they get that praise and they so crave that praise and they don't feel that they get it at home. And once they talk to their spouse about what they need, what would make home easier for them, what they need as far as like feeling appreciated and loved in that relationship, their spouse will come through and then all of a sudden they don't feel the need to be at work quite as much because home doesn't feel as chaotic as work. Does that, you know what I'm saying? Like, because they work through the issues. I feel like a lot of people
Yeah.
use work to avoid. It's like, oh no,
Yeah.
no, I'm providing for my family and I'm doing a good thing. So I don't need to address this behavior, even if I'm a workaholic. And it's like, no, 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 you do. You still need to address it. We gotta work through it.
Well, I'm going to invite our audience to put a pin in the self-care issue because I think we need to have you back to focus strictly on work-life
Balance.
self-care balance. Will you do that for us?
Oh, definitely. My whole practice is built around work-life balance. We're very big on that here. We have all moms and we have weird, crazy schedules so that we can accommodate our lives and be present for our clients. I think it's so important. It was really lovely talking to you.
Thank
It's just
you.
a
Thank
wonderful,
you,
wonderful
Jamie.
experience.
Thank you.
Um, if
Likewise.
anyone wants to learn more about EMDR or what we do, I have a podcast called Good Enough with a Trauma Therapist. Streams pretty much everywhere. And it's a lot of psychoed information about like how to regulate your body, why we fall into these patterns, how to break the patterns. And I have other guests that come on that talk about like things that they've gone through and the ways that they solve things with their clients, because I am super into EMDR, but there are so many other wonderful modalities out there that I also think it's really important for people to know what might work for them, because what works for me might not work for you, right? So the podcast is good enough with the trauma therapist. If you're in New York or Missouri, we have therapists and medication management. For New Yorkers, it's www.liemdr.com. And for anyone located in Missouri, it is www.resilient-mo.com.
Thanks so much for tuning into Truth Tastes Funny. If you enjoyed the experience, please leave a 5-star review and share this podcast with your friends.